the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, James. And thanks everybody for joining. Thanks for all the debaters for agreeing to this. Now, the topic is whether Islam is violent or dangerous or not. When you read the Quran, you will very quickly find out that the Quran has a very hostile language. For example, in Quran chapter 2 verse 171 and many other places, the Quran refers to the disbelievers as deaf, dumb, and blind. This is something that you can find repeated in the Quran many times. In Quran chapter 7 verse 179, for example, we find that the Quran even says that the disbelievers are worse than cattle. It says, to be specific, that Allah created many of the jinns and mankind for hell, and that they have hearts with which they do not understand. Those are the disbelievers, and they are like livestock, but rather they are even more astray. In chapter 8, verse 55 and 98, verse 6, we see twice that the Quran refers to disbelievers, including Christians, Jews, and polytheists, and disbelievers altogether, those who do not believe in Islam, as opposed to those who believe in Islam, as the worst of creatures. And in fact, in chapter 98, it is made the distinction is made very clear, where the disbelievers, so those who do not believe, are described as the worst of creatures, and those who do believe are then described as the best of creatures. This is just the beginning of the very hostile language which we find in the Quran. What does the Quran exactly command Muslims to do, on top of just insulting and dehumanizing the disbelievers? We find in chapter 9, verse 29, one of my favorite verses of a very telling Quran verse of the themes of the Quran. It says in chapter 9, verse 29, that the Muslims are supposed to fight those who do not believe in Allah and His Messenger, and who do not adopt the religion of truth, Islam, and to fight them until they are humiliated and they give the jizya, which is protection money. So Muslims have the mission, the command, to go out into the world and to fight and forcibly subjugate those who do not believe in Islam and those who do not want to accept it. And Muhammad himself practiced this. Muhammad himself went around declaring war, finding reasons to fight his opponents and basically subjugating them. And he also clearly said, as we can see in a hadith, which is a report about the things that Muhammad did and said, in Sahih Muslim, book 32, hadith 75, he says that he wants to expel all Jews and Christians from the Arabian Peninsula and leave nobody but Muslims. And in Sahih Bukhari, later on, he also says that he has been ordered to fight the people until they say that none has the right to be worshipped but Allah, and that Muhammad is his messenger. So if Muhammad himself, the prophet, the central figure, the authority in Islam, declares in, you can find this in Sahih Bukhari, book 24, hadith 5, he says, I have been commanded to fight the people until they convert to Islam. Basically, this is what Muhammad's mission is, and what the Quran also reflects. It says further in the Quran that you should not befriend the Jews and Christians because they are friends of each other. It says in chapter 9, verse 28, that polytheists are unclean, and so on. There is no end to how the Quran not just otherizes, but also insults, humiliates, and dehumanizes the disbelievers, or the so-called enemies of Islam. If we look at Muhammad's life, we can also see that he did some very atrocious things, such as, for reference, in Sahih Bukhari, book 63, verse hadith 48, we find an example in which Muhammad sends his men to a polytheistic temple in Arabia, in the southern part of Arabia, in Yemen, called Dhul Khalasa. And according to different reports, we also understand that this temple is apparently quite similar to the Kaaba, which Muhammad adopted from the polytheists. He sends his armies and lets them destroy this temple. In the report, we see that Muhammad says, "Will you relieve me from Dhul Khalasa, this temple?" So his men leave with 150 cavalrymen and destroy the temple. And it says, I quote, "And we killed whomever we found there. Then we came to the prophet and informed him about it, and he invoked good upon us and upon the tribe of Ahmas," who are the people who did this job for him, going and destroying a temple and killing whoever is there. This is what Muhammad does. This is what Muhammad's armies, what Muhammad's people did. We can also find another report, Sahih Bukhari, book 24, hadith 5, in which we see again repeated the idea that Muhammad said, "I have been ordered to fight the people till they say none has the right to be worshipped but Allah." But in this report, we also find something else. Here we find that Muhammad's successors, the people after him, did not just go out and fight those who don't believe. They also fought all the Muslims within who separated themselves from the Islamic leadership and tried to practice Islam differently. So the Caliph Abu Bakr, after Muhammad died, actually used this pretense and fought fellow Muslims because they weren't good enough, not traditionalist enough. This is what Islam is. There is more to it: slavery, sex slavery, pillaging, robbery, wife beating, and so on. But I think I want to kick it over to David here and let him handle the rest and let him show how Islam is played out in real life today.
All right. You hear me, James?
Yes.
All right. So AP there at the end was mentioning Abu Bakr and Muslims actually fighting Muslims. And notice it was that first generation of Muslims that almost annihilated itself with violence. I mean, Aisha, the mother of the faithful, marched an army against Ali, the commander of the faithful. And approximately 10,000 Muslims, if I recall correctly, died in battle. These were Muslims who fought alongside of Muhammad at battles like Badr and Uhud and so on, and they're slaughtering each other over a disagreement. And what's sad about that is Muhammad said that the best generation of Muslims was that first generation. And the first generation was so overcome by violence that they almost annihilated themselves with violence. And Muhammad said, again, that's the best generation. And so we can see from the Muslim sources, I mean, in Islam, we're asking if it's violent. The solution for almost everything in Islam is violence. The solution for unbelief is violence. The solution for apostasy is violence. If your wife gets out of line, you can warn her first, but if that doesn't work, the solution is violence, various kinds of crimes or sins, stealing, for instance. The solution is violence. It's violence, 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 violence. If we ask whether Islam is violent, if you want to say no, you either have to change the meaning of the word violence or you have to change the meaning of Islam. But the various polls in recent years have shown just how prevalent some of these views are. So just to be clear in advance, there are plenty of Muslims in the world who sincerely believe that Islam is peaceful and who don't want to kill us and so on. Nevertheless, some of these statistics are fairly disturbing. In a 2004 poll, 65% of Muslims in Pakistan, 55% of Muslims in Jordan, and 45% of Muslims in Morocco said they had a favorable view of Osama bin Laden. 44% of Pakistani Muslims in 2011 said they viewed Osama bin Laden as a martyr. So you're talking almost half. 34% of Muslims in Jordan, 49% of Muslims in Nigeria, 23% of Muslims in Indonesia, and 20% of Muslims in Egypt said they have a favorable view of Al-Qaeda. 31% of Muslims in Turkey say that suicide attacks against Americans and other Westerners in Iraq are justifiable. 1/3 of Palestinian Muslims said they support the massacre of the Fogel family, which included a 3-month-old baby. 78% of Pakistani Muslims say they support the death penalty for leaving Islam. And so even if you're dealing with lower percentages like 21 or 25 or something like that, you're still talking about a lot of people. When you're talking about 1.6 billion Muslims and you're looking at countries and you're seeing statistics like 65% favor this or 78% of that, you're talking about millions of people who want violence. And so if you're saying Islam isn't violent, then the only conclusion we could draw is that you're claiming that this many people are misunderstanding Islam in exactly the same way. So that would be the question. Why are so many Muslims, if it's not violent, misunderstanding it in exactly the same way? And it's not just Muslim countries. It's not just Muslim majority countries. You can come to the West. 2009, nearly 1 in 4 British Muslims said that the 7/7 bombings were justified. So you're talking about a quarter. 30% of British Muslims said they would rather live under Sharia law than under British law. 68% of British Muslims said they support the arrest and prosecution of anyone who supports Islam. Notice that's me and AP. 68%, over half of British Muslims said they support our arrest and prosecution for insulting Islam. 18% of British Muslim students said they would not inform police if a fellow Muslim was planning a terrorist attack. So if one of their friends said, hey, I'm launching a terrorist attack and I'm going to go, blow up a train or something like that, 18% of British Muslim students said they're not going to notify authorities about that. And so we see these kinds of statistics, and then we see very, very popular Muslims today, people like Ali Dawah, warning that if he ever gets control of society, people like AP are going to be executed. He says that, and his followers are very happy about that. We have Sheikh Asim al-Hakim, who laid out the overall plan. He said Muslims are too weak right now to conquer the world. But he said if Muslims keep preparing right now, then in a few decades, they may get to the stage where they're able to go door to door, knocking at the door, giving people 3 options. And the options are, not according to me, according to Sheikh Asim al-Hakim and the Muslim sources he's getting it from, you either convert to Islam or you pay the jizya, or, in his words, and he meant that you should be killed. And if that's your idea of a peaceful religion, again, you're gonna have to change the meaning of the words violence or peace or Islam to get something peaceful out of this.